The first chill of autumn always snaked its way into Willow Creek with the subtle whisper of dry leaves and the rich, earthy scent of wood smoke from Mr. Henderson's chimney. For 72 years, I've watched the seasons turn in this quiet corner of Vermont, each one bringing its own predictable comfort. My mornings began with the gentle hum of the coffee maker, a well-worn copy of the local paper, and the sweet promise of sun-warmed hydrangeas just outside my kitchen window. My days were a rhythm of tending my rose garden, a symphony of crimson and blush that was my pride and joy, baking my famed apple pies, and sharing a knowing nod with Mrs. Gable from across the street as she watered her petunias. This was my life, meticulously crafted, serenely maintained. A haven. A meticulously built illusion, perhaps, but a sanctuary nonetheless. But lately, the harmony had been fractured. A discordant note had crept into the melody of my peaceful existence, and its source was my son, Michael. Michael, my gentle, history-loving boy, now a man of 45, a respected teacher at the local high school, a loving husband to Sarah, and a doting father to my two bright grandchildren, Emily and David. He was the anchor of my world, the constant reminder of a life I had built on firm foundations, far from the shifting sands of my past. Yet, 4 weeks now, he had been distant. His eyes, usually so warm with the light of curiosity and affection, held a new, unsettling shadow. His laughter was less frequent, his shoulders more hunched, as if bearing an invisible weight. He'd jump at unexpected sounds, his phone was practically glued to his hand, and he often excused himself mid-conversation, muttering about work. It wasn't like him. Not my Michael. My heart, usually so steady in its old age, a testament to decades of careful living, now fluttered with an unfamiliar anxiety. A mother knows her child, not just their habits, but the very resonance of their soul. And Michael's soul was troubled. I'd tried to coax it out of him, of course. Over cups of tea, during our weekly Sunday dinners, even during the quiet moments we shared while watering his small vegetable patch. "Is everything all right, dear?" I'd ask, my voice carefully modulated, casual. He'd always offer a reassuring, though strained, smile. "Just school, Mom. You know how it is." But I did know. And this wasn't just school. He was spending an inordinate amount of time in the old garage behind his house, a place that once belonged to his father, Arthur. Arthur, God rest his soul, had spent his last years painstakingly restoring a vintage Ford Mustang, a powerful beast of a car that symbolized his youth. He never finished it. Michael had promised to complete his father's work, a promise he'd taken to heart with almost religious fervor. But now, the garage had become less a sanctuary of shared purpose and more a fortress, an enigma. The roar of the engine, which used to signify progress, had become a muffled sound of secrecy. Today, the silence from the garage was what worried me most. Too quiet. My solution, as it often was, involved baking. A fresh batch of Michael's favorite oatmeal raisin cookies. The scent of cinnamon and oats filled my kitchen, a warm, comforting aroma that always had a way of cutting through the sharp edges of my worries. I carefully arranged them on my grandmother's antique porcelain platter, covered them with a linen cloth, and decided. This was it. A simple, maternal gesture. An excuse. My real intention was far less innocent. I wanted to see him. Not just see him, but observe him. To catch a glimpse of whatever secret gnawed at his peace. I told myself it was just a mother's concern, a simple need to reassure myself. But a deeper, older instinct, one I had carefully buried for decades, was stirring. A premonition, a cold claw gripping my insides, warned me that something significant, something dangerous, was unfolding. Old scars, both visible and invisible, tingled under my skin. The autumn air outside was crisp, carrying the faintest hint of wood smoke. The leaves on the maples were already painting the hillsides in fiery hues of red and gold. It was a beautiful, tranquil afternoon. The kind of afternoon where nothing truly terrible should ever happen. I walked the short distance to Michael's house, the platter of cookies a familiar weight in my hands. Sarah was out, likely at her book club. The grandchildren were at school. The house was quiet. As I approached the garage, the faint rumble of voices reached me. Not the usual clatter of tools and the lone murmur of Michael humming to himself. Two voices. One was definitely Michael's, low and tense. The other, unfamiliar. Deep, gravelly, with an undercurrent of something sharp, almost predatory. My heart gave a little lurch. This was it. The reason for his secrecy. I slowed my pace, my steps barely rustling the fallen leaves on the driveway. The old wooden door of the garage was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness promising an illicit peek. My pulse quickened. The smell of oil and gasoline mingled with the faint, sweet scent of the cookies I carried. My hand trembled, nearly dropping the platter. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating in my chest, telling myself it was nothing. Just a client, Michael had said. Just a friend. But the unease clawed at me. I carefully, silently, pushed the door a fraction wider, just enough to glimpse inside without being seen. The dusty light filtering through the high window illuminated the scene. Michael stood hunched over the engine of the Mustang, a wrench in his hand, his posture rigid. His face was drawn, a mask of grim determination and barely concealed fear. And sitting on a worn wooden stool beside him, nursing a can of beer, was the other man. He was old, certainly, with a face weathered by time and perhaps by something far more sinister than the elements. His hair was sparse, graying at the temples, but his eyes, sharp and unervingly alert, swept the garage as if searching for an escape route or a hidden threat. He wore a dark leather jacket, even indoors, and his posture exuded a casual menace. One glance. That's all it took. One chilling, agonizing glance at his profile. The way his mouth twisted into a cynical smirk, the scar, a faint, jagged line just above his left eyebrow, catching the dim light. It was a detail so specific, so deeply etched into the nightmares of my youth, that it ripped through the carefully constructed veil of my present life with brutal force. My breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. The gentle hum of Willow Creek, the comforting scent of autumn, the illusion of my peaceful existence, it all shattered like fragile glass. It was him. Silas Thorne. The ghost from my most terrifying past. The man I had prayed to every saint, every forgotten god, never to see again. He was alive. And he was here. Sitting next to my son. My hands clenched, the cookies forgotten. My entire body went cold, then hot with a searing dread. The sanctuary I had built, the new identity I had worn for decades, was not just threatened, it was already breached. The past hadn't just knocked, it had walked right into my son's garage, into the very heart of my fragile, precious world. This wasn't about cookies. This was about survival. And Silas Thorne had just dragged me back into a game I thought I'd escaped a lifetime ago. My breath caught, a painful gasp that scratched at my throat. The porcelain platter, heavy with the weight of oatmeal raisin cookies and a lifetime of maternal affection, slipped from my trembling fingers. It hit the gravel drive with a muted thud, the ceramic cracking, scattering buttery crumbs and fragmented hopes across the autumnal leaves. I barely registered the sound, or the loss. My world had just cracked wide open. I stumbled backward, away from the sliver of light and shadow, away from the man whose presence was a poison seeping into the tranquil air. My legs felt like jelly, ready to buckle beneath me, each muscle screaming in protest. My chest constricted, a vice tightening around my lungs, stealing the air from my 72-year-old body. I pressed my palm against my mouth, a futile attempt to stifle a cry, a moan of utter despair. The bitter taste of panic, sharp and metallic, flooded my mouth. No. It can't be. It can't be him. My mind, usually so sharp and orderly, raced in a desperate frenzy of denial. It was a mistake. A trick of the fading light. My eyesight wasn't what it used to be, a consequence of age, a convenient excuse. Just a resemblance. A cruel twist of fate, playing with my oldest fears. Men age, they change. Hair thins, faces wrinkle. He couldn't possibly be the same man. That life, that world, that monstrous shadow, was dead. Buried. Decades ago. But even as I desperately clung to these fragile threads of doubt, a deeper, more primal part of me knew the truth with an icy, sickening certainty. The scar. That jagged, almost imperceptible line above his left eyebrow. A signature. A brand. I'd seen it up close, felt the phantom touch of a blade that had left it there. And his eyes. Those chilling, calculating eyes, that restless energy. It was him. Silas Thorne. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror, echoing the rhythm of a distant past. Ilara. The name, my old name, screamed in my head, a forgotten siren call from a lifetime ago. Images, sharp and violent, began to flash behind my eyes, unbidden, unwelcome. Fragments of a nightmare I had spent half a century trying to erase. The oppressive heat of a humid New York night. The acrid smell of smoke and gasoline. The guttural shouts of men, their faces contorted by greed and violence. The shattering of glass. The metallic tang of fear in my own mouth. Then, his face. Younger, sharper, leaner, but unmistakably his. A sneer, a glint of cruel amusement in his eyes as he held something, a small, heavy bag, perhaps, in one hand, while gesturing menacingly with the other. A woman's scream, shrill and brief, cut short by something heavy falling. A sudden, blinding flash of orange fire. And my own desperate, animalistic urge to run. To disappear. To shed my skin and become someone else. I swayed, my vision blurring, the familiar world of Michael's driveway twisting into the chaotic inferno of my past. My knees finally gave out, and I sank to the ground, scraping my hand on the rough gravel. The pain was dull, distant, overshadowed by the searing agony of remembrance. I pushed myself up, scrambling, almost crawling, back down the driveway, away from the garage. Away from Michael. Away from Silas. My breath came in ragged gasps, each one a struggle. I didn't dare look back. I just needed to put distance between myself and that awful truth, even if it was just a few agonizing yards. When I reached my own front door, I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking so violently I thought I might drop it. The familiar scent of wood polish and lavender inside my home, usually so comforting, now felt alien, mocking. This sanctuary, this quiet life I had so meticulously built brick by brick, lie in ruins. The walls I had erected, stone by careful stone, to protect myself from the echoes of Ilara Reed, had been breached. I leaned against the closed door, gasping, my head spinning. The quiet hum of my refrigerator, the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, these sounds of domestic peace were a cruel counterpoint to the raging storm within me. My heart raced as if I had just run a marathon, and the cold sweat prickled my skin despite the warmth of the house. Silas. Here. In Willow Creek. With Michael. The implications were a suffocating weight. He hadn't just appeared. He wouldn't have just stumbled upon us. He was here for a reason. And that reason, I knew with bone-deep dread, could only be me. Or, more precisely, what I represented. What I knew. What I had. Michael. My gentle, unsuspecting son. He was caught in this, entangled in a web spun by a ghost from my past. A past he knew nothing about. A past that could shatter his life, his family, everything he held dear. The fear for him was a physical ache, sharper than any wound I had ever sustained. He was innocent. He didn't deserve this. I walked to the kitchen, my movements stiff and jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings. The remnants of my grandmother's platter lay on the floor, a stark reminder of the crumbling piece. The sweet scent of cinnamon and oats, meant to be a comfort, now felt like an unbearable irony. My perfect life. My perfect lie. It was over. The game was over. Silas Thorne, a man I had believed dead or banished to the deepest recesses of my memory, had returned. And his return meant one thing: the carefully constructed identity of Eleanor Vance was about to unravel, exposing the raw, ugly truth of Elara Reed. And Michael, my precious son, was standing directly in the path of the storm. I closed my eyes, picturing Silas's face again. The cold, calculating look in his eyes. He hadn't changed. Not truly. The years had only sharpened his edges, honed his predatory instincts. And he was here. For what? To finish what he started? To finally claim what he believed was his? The quiet life of Eleanor Vance, the gentle grandmother and avid gardener, was a facade. And Silas Thorne was about to tear it down. I had to protect Michael. At any cost. Even if it meant digging up the very demons I had spent a lifetime burying. The game was indeed over, but a new, far more dangerous one had just begun. The next few days blurred into a suffocating haze of hyper-awareness and cold dread. My usual routine, once a source of comfort, now felt like a fragile shield against an encroaching darkness. Every morning, I still watered my hydrangeas, but my gaze constantly darted towards Michael's house, my ears straining for any sound from his garage. My hands still kneaded dough for bread, but the warmth of the flour felt alien, my thoughts miles away, tangled in a web of fear and fractured memories. I became a ghost in my own life, moving through the familiar motions while my mind was consumed by a single, terrifying question: what is Silas doing to my son? Michael's demeanor confirmed my worst fears. The tension that had been a faint tremor beneath his surface now manifested as a constant, visible tremor. His smile, when he offered it, was a brittle thing, easily shattered. He ate less, slept little, and his eyes, once so bright and full of life, now held a haunted, faraway look, like a man trapped in a waking nightmare. He'd pace the floor during phone calls, his voice low and urgent, only to cut the conversation short with a sudden, "I'll call you back," if I entered the room. He became adept at avoiding my gaze, at deflecting my gentle inquiries with vague answers and forced cheerfulness. And Silas. He became a fixture. Not daily, not openly, but enough to cast a long, chilling shadow over Michael's home. His beat-up black pickup truck, a utilitarian, anonymous vehicle, would often appear in Michael's driveway, usually in the late afternoon or evening, after the school day ended. Sometimes, I'd see it parked there for hours, its presence an insidious cancer spreading through the peaceful neighborhood. I'd watch from behind my lace curtains, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, as Silas would emerge from the garage, sometimes alone, sometimes with Michael, his face unreadable, his casual posture belaying a barely contained menace. He never looked my way, never acknowledged my existence, and for that, I was both relieved and deeply terrified. It meant he hadn't come for me directly yet. He was using Michael as his leverage. Subtle changes started to manifest around Michael. He began wearing a new watch, a heavy, expensive-looking silver timepiece that was entirely out of character for him. Michael, who valued practicality over extravagance, who always wore his father's old, reliable Timex. Where did he get it? It certainly wasn't a teacher's salary acquisition. There was a new, sleek toolbox in his garage, one I glimpsed through the window, far too professional for a hobbyist, gleaming ominously amidst Arthur's old, rusty tools. Small things, perhaps, but to my reawakened senses, they screamed of illicit activity, of a world that was fast consuming my son. One particularly crisp afternoon, the air smelling of apples and imminent frost, I ventured over to Michael's. Sarah was at work, and the children were still at school. I told myself I was bringing over a fresh loaf of sourdough, but my real motive was to talk to Michael, to force the issue. To peel back the layers of his fear and find the truth. I found him in the garage, hunched over the Mustang's engine, just as he had been the day I first saw Silas. But today, he was alone. The wrench in his hand trembled slightly, and his brow was furrowed in concentration, or perhaps, despair. He didn't notice me at first. "Michael?" I said, my voice soft, but firm. He jumped, startling so violently that he nearly dropped the wrench. He spun around, his eyes wide and panicked, before quickly composing himself. "Mom. You startled me." He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What are you doing here?" "Just brought you some bread, dear," I said, placing the warm loaf on a nearby workbench. The smell of yeast and warm crust briefly cut through the familiar scent of oil and metal. "You've been working hard. You look tired." He rubbed a hand across his forehead, smearing grease across his temple. "Yeah, this old thing is giving me a run for my money. Lots of fiddly bits." "And your friend?" I asked, trying to sound casual, my voice betraying none of the terror bubbling beneath. "The man who's been visiting? Is he helping you with the car?" Michael's body stiffened visibly. His gaze darted away, towards the far wall, then back to the engine. "Oh, him? That's Mr. Thorne. Silas Thorne. He's not really helping with the car, Mom. He's a client." "A client?" I raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "For what, dear?" "You're a history teacher." He shifted his weight, his discomfort palpable. He's interested in some old documents. Local history. Genealogies. I'm doing some research for him." He waved a dismissive hand, as if to brush away my questions. "It's nothing, Mom. Just a little extra cash. You know, with the kids getting older, college funds and all that." His voice was too loud, too quick. His explanation was paper-thin, transparent to my experienced eye. "History? Genealogies?" My voice was calm, but my blood ran cold. Silas Thorne had never cared about history, only about profit. And survival. "He seems to spend a lot of time here for old documents, Michael. And he doesn't strike me as the type to frequent the library archives." Michael's face flushed. His jaw tightened. "Mom, please. It's really not a big deal. He's intense, sure, but he's paying well. And I need the money." He wouldn't meet my gaze. The lie hung heavy in the air between us, a poisonous cloud. "Need the money for what, Michael?" I pressed, my heart aching. "Is everything all right with Sarah? With the house?" He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw it, not just fear, but a flicker of resentment, a desperate plea for me to just drop it. "Everything is fine, Mom. I just need to get this car done. And this extra work helps." He turned back to the Mustang, his posture closing off, dismissing me. "Look, I really need to focus. I'll see you Sunday for dinner, okay?" I knew then, with absolute certainty, that he was lying. He wasn't just working on a project for extra cash. He was caught. Trapped. Silas Thorne wasn't hiring a history teacher for genealogical research. He was ensnaring a good, honest man in something dark, something dangerous. And the more Michael tried to push me away, the more determined I became. As I walked back across the driveway, the fresh sourdough loaf still warm in my hands, I saw Silas's truck turn the corner onto the street. He was early today. I quickly ducked behind my own garage, not wanting to be seen, not wanting him to know I was watching. The truck pulled into Michael's driveway, and Silas, agile for his age, emerged. He gave a quick, almost imperceptible glance around the neighborhood, his eyes sweeping over my house for a fleeting second before he entered the garage. A flicker of something in his gaze, a cunning intelligence, a cold awareness. Did he know I was there? Was he playing a game of cat and mouse? The shadow he cast over Michael's house was long, dark, and growing with each passing day. My peaceful life, my meticulously crafted sanctuary, was not just breached, it was now a battleground. And I, Eleanor Vance, the quiet grandmother, was about to become a Lara Reed once more. The hunt was on. And this time, my prey was the ghost of my past, who held my son's future in his chilling grip. The bread, still warm from the oven, lay untouched on my kitchen counter. Its comforting aroma, which usually filled me with a sense of purpose and peace, now felt like a bitter mockery. Michael's evasiveness, his forced smiles, the barely concealed fear in his eyes, they were all arrows piercing the heart of my carefully constructed serenity. Silas Thorne wasn't just a client. He was a predator, and my son, my unsuspecting, good-hearted son, was his prey. The next morning, an unseasonably warm sun streamed through my kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, but failing to warm the ice in my veins. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic thoughts. I needed answers. I needed to understand the depth of Michael's entanglement. And there was only one place I could start, Michael's garage. I waited until I saw Michael's car pull out of his driveway, heading towards the high school. Then, I watched as Sarah left for her shift at the clinic. The coast was clear. My heart hammered with a mixture of fear and grim determination. This was a violation of his privacy, a boundary I would never normally cross. But this wasn't about propriety anymore. This was about survival. Stepping into the garage was like stepping into a different world. The familiar scent of oil and gasoline was stronger here, mixed with a faint, metallic tang I couldn't quite place. The Mustang, Arthur's beloved project, sat forlornly on jacks, its engine exposed, a tangle of wires and pipes. Tools lay scattered on the workbench, a chaotic array that was unlike Michael's usual tidiness. He was distracted, clearly. My eyes swept the room, searching. What was I looking for? I didn't know. A clue. A sign. Something to confirm my suspicions and perhaps reveal the nature of Silas's hold over him. My gaze fell upon the new toolbox I had glimpsed days earlier. It was sleek, modern, with a lock on the top drawer. Too new, too expensive, too out of place. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my soul, reached for the drawer. It was locked, of course. But decades ago, Alara Reed had learned a thing or two about locks. It was a skill I had hoped to bury forever, a relic of a dangerous past. Now, it was a necessary evil. I scanned the garage, my eyes darting from one corner to another. Hidden keys? Perhaps. But Silas wouldn't be so careless. My gaze settled on an old, forgotten fishing tackle box, dusty and tucked away beneath the workbench. Arthur's. He'd kept spare keys in there sometimes, for the shed, for the old tractor. A long shot. But worth a try. I opened it. Amidst rusty hooks and tangled fishing line, nestled under a faded flannel cloth, was a small, crudely fashioned wire. A pick. One that Arthur had used for an old antique chest he'd bought, a hobby of his. And something else. A small, flat piece of metal. A cold certainty settled over me. This wasn't Arthur's. This was recent. And it looked exactly like the kind of improvised lock-picking set I had once known. Michael wouldn't have had this. Not for antique chests. Not for fishing. My son, the history teacher, was acquiring tools of a trade he shouldn't know. My fingers, remembering the forgotten motions, picked up the wire. It felt disturbingly familiar in my hand. I knelt before the new toolbox, my breath held. My ears strained, listening for any sound of an approaching car, a stray noise that might betray my presence. The world outside, the chirping birds, the distant hum of traffic, seemed impossibly far away. It was just me, the toolbox, and the terrifying echo of my past. The lock was simple, not designed for serious security. My fingers, guided by instinct, moved with surprising agility. A click. Then another. The satisfying thunk as the drawer sprang open was both a triumph and a sickening confirmation of my fears. Inside, it was orderly, but chilling. Not wrenches and screwdrivers, but a collection of specialized tools. Slim Jims, small, delicate instruments I recognized as being used for manipulating car locks, and, most disturbingly, a set of master keys, clearly labeled for various car models. This wasn't about fixing Arthur's Mustang. This was about something else entirely. Something illicit. Beneath the tools, folded neatly, were documents. Not history papers. These were printouts of property records, old blueprints, some of them clearly for abandoned warehouses or commercial buildings in distant towns. There were numbers, dates, times, coordinates, jotted down in Michael's neat handwriting, next to various addresses. My gaze froze on one particular name, Fairchild's Diamond Exchange. The name sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. Fairchild's. The name was a punch to the gut. The memory, so long suppressed, burst forth with brutal clarity. Elara Reed, young, impulsive, desperate. She was just trying to survive in the harsh concrete jungle of New York City. A chance encounter, a bad crowd, a charismatic leader named Julian. And then Silas Thorne, Julian's cruel enforcer, his right-hand man. They promised her a way out, a chance at a better life. A simple job, they called it. Nothing too risky. Just a lookout. Just a distraction. But it wasn't simple. It was Fairchild's Diamond Exchange. A high-stakes heist, far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The screams, the shattered display cases, the cold gleam of steel in Julian's hand. And Silas, always in the thick of it, his eyes alight with a dangerous thrill. The plan went sideways. The alarm blared. A security guard, brave but foolish, tried to intervene. And then, the gunshots. And the fire. A diversion, Julian had snarled, as the flames engulfed the back offices. Chaos. Panic. Elara, frozen, watching the inferno, the faces of the terrified employees, the chilling efficiency of Julian and Silas as they snatched whatever they could and fled. She ran too. Not with them, but away from them. Away from the fire, the sirens, the screaming, the stench of burning fear. She ran with a small, heavy object clutched in her hand, something she grabbed in a moment of sheer panic, something she hadn't even looked at. A lucky charm, she'd thought then. A piece of the past she needed to burn. She saw Julian and Silas disappear into the night, leaving a trail of destruction and death. She was a witness. An accessory. A survivor, barely. And she knew, with terrifying certainty, that if they ever found her, she would pay the ultimate price. That night, Elara Reed died. And Eleanor Vance was born. My eyes snapped back to the documents in Michael's toolbox. Fairchild's Diamond Exchange. The same name. The same operation. It couldn't be a coincidence. Silas was revisiting the scene of his old crime, or a similar one. And he was dragging Michael into it. A cold dread seeped into my bones, worse than anything I had felt before. Silas wasn't just here to re-establish contact. He was planning something new. Or, perhaps, something he had failed to finish all those years ago. And Michael was going to be forced to complete it for him. I carefully closed the drawer, clicking the lock back into place, leaving no trace of my intrusion. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the resurgence of a fear so profound it had once defined my entire existence. The weight of my secret, the burden of Elara Reed's past, was no longer merely a personal cross to bear. It was a clear and present danger to my son. Silas Thorne wasn't just a shadow. He was a living, breathing threat. And he was orchestrating something that would destroy Michael, just as it had nearly destroyed me. The past wasn't just calling, it was screaming. And I, Eleanor Vance, had no choice but to answer. The air in my kitchen, usually filled with the comforting scents of chamomile and homemade bread, now felt thick with unspoken fear. The documents from Michael's toolbox, the name Fairchild's Diamond Exchange, played a relentless loop in my mind. It was an anchor dropped into the deepest, darkest waters of my past, pulling me back to an identity I had painstakingly eradicated. Elara Reed. The girl I was, the monster I'd escaped. That afternoon, I found myself in the local library, a place I frequented for its quiet charm and the smell of old paper. Today, however, I wasn't seeking solace in fiction. I needed facts. My ostensible purpose was to research heirloom rose varieties for my garden club, a perfectly innocuous cover. But beneath the benign facade, Ilara was stirring, her old instincts for clandestine information gathering resurfacing like dormant predators. I navigated to the library's public computers, my fingers, usually nimble with knitting needles, now tapping with a renewed purpose on the keyboard. Google. A word I had come to grudgingly accept as a tool of the modern world. I searched for Fairchild's Diamond Exchange New York robbery 1970s. The results were immediate, a torrent of digital whispers from a bygone era. Old newspaper archives. Yellowed scans of articles detailing the brazen, violent robbery that had rocked the city decades ago. My heart pounded as I scrolled through headlines, each one a hammer blow to the walls I'd built around my memories. Daring diamond heist leaves one dead, building engulfed in flames. NYC police hunt gang responsible for Fairchild's inferno. Ilara Reid, alleged accomplice, vanishes without a trace. My breath hitched at my own name. Ilara Reid. There, in black and white, laid bare for anyone to see. The accompanying photo, a grainy, police mugshot composite, showed a younger, wilder version of me. Eyes wide with a mixture of defiance and terror. My stomach churned. This was it. The official record of the night I had died and been reborn. I clicked on an article that mentioned the suspects. Julian Vance, the charismatic leader, pronounced dead in a separate shootout years later. And then, there it was, Silas Thorne, a known associate of Vance, was initially questioned but disappeared before formal charges could be filed. Believed to have fled the country. Fled the country. Or simply melted into the shadows, a ghost in the criminal underworld, just as I had. And now, he was back. The articles detailed the brutal efficiency of the gang, the staggering value of the diamonds stolen, the desperate hunt by the police, and the unsolved mystery of certain items that were never recovered. A small, distinctive emerald pendant, rumored to be of immense value and a key component of the Fairchild family's private collection, was never found. My eyes narrowed. Emerald pendant. A memory, fleeting but sharp, pricked at my mind. The chaos. The burning building. My frantic escape. And the small, heavy object I'd clutched, not knowing what it was, only that it was something. Something that had fallen from a velvet-lined display case. Something small enough to fit in my palm. I'd buried it. Deep. Far from the world, far from myself. A testament to my escape, a tangible piece of that hellish night. I hadn't thought about it in decades. It was just a heavy, cold rock to me then. But to Silas. Suddenly, the pieces clicked into place with a horrifying precision. Silas wasn't just planning a new job. He was trying to finish an old one. He hadn't forgotten the emerald pendant. Or, more likely, he knew I had it, or had always suspected I did. He was looking for what I had unknowingly taken. Or perhaps, what he believed I had intentionally stolen from him. The reason for his reappearance, for his insidious entanglement with Michael, crystallized into a single, terrifying truth. Silas was here for the pendant. And he believed Michael could lead him to it. Or, perhaps, he was using Michael to pressure me into revealing its hiding place. My past wasn't just calling, it was violently ripping its way back into my present, dragging my innocent son along with it. Michael, in his desperation for extra cash, had become a pawn in Silas's decades-long game. Silas had probably found Michael through some convoluted path, perhaps through financial difficulties, exploiting his vulnerability. He had likely presented himself as an opportunity, a solution, only to reveal the true cost later. I closed the browser, the glowing screen reflecting my pale, drawn face. Eleanor Vance, the serene gardener, was gone. In her place, Ilara Reid stood, older, wiser, but with the same fire of survival burning in her gut. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now tempered by a fierce, maternal protectiveness. I walked home through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, the familiar houses and manicured lawns seeming alien, detached from the swirling vortex of my thoughts. Each rustling leaf sounded like a whispered threat. Every passing car felt like a potential pursuer. Silas Thorne wasn't just a threat to my secret, he was a threat to Michael's life. He was dangerous, ruthless, and he knew I was alive. He knew my old identity. And he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. And this time, I wasn't running. I was fighting. For Michael. For my family. For the life I had built, flawed as it was. The emerald pendant, buried deep beneath my tranquil rose garden, was no longer just a forgotten artifact. It was a ticking time bomb. And I was the only one who knew where it was. The quiet, unassuming exterior of Eleanor Vance had always been my greatest disguise. Now, it was time to turn that disguise into my most potent weapon. It was time for Alara Reid to resurface, not as a victim, but as a warrior. The air grew sharper, the leaves crunchier beneath my sensible walking shoes. Autumn was deepening, mirroring the chill that had settled deep in my bones. With each passing day, the insidious influence of Silas Thorne wove itself tighter around Michael, transforming him from my gentle son into a man I barely recognized. The thin threads of his life, once so vibrant and strong, were becoming frayed, stretched taut by an unseen hand. I watched, a silent observer from my kitchen window, as Michael's car would sometimes leave at odd hours, long after Sarah and the children were asleep. He'd return before dawn, looking even more haggard, more burdened. The heavy, expensive watch on his wrist was no longer an anomaly, it was a symbol of his debt, his entanglement. It screamed of deals made in shadows, of sleepless nights filled with regret. The tension at Michael's house was palpable, even from across the lawn. Sarah, usually so bright and open, now carried a perpetual frown. Her laughter, once so easy, had dwindled to a strained chuckle, a mere ghost of its former self. I saw her crying silently in her garden once, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking. My heart twisted with a fresh wave of agony. My past was not just destroying Michael, it was tearing apart his family, the very fabric of my grandchildren's innocence. I knew I couldn't stand by any longer, observing from the sidelines. I had to approach Sarah, however delicate the conversation might be. She deserved to know something, even if I couldn't yet reveal the full, horrifying truth. One afternoon, I baked a lemon pound cake, a favorite of Sarah's, and carried it over. The excuse was simple, comforting. The reality was a desperate attempt to breach the wall of silence that had grown between us. Sarah opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. "Eleanor. Come in." Her voice was soft, fragile. The house, usually filled with the energetic chaos of children and the warm scent of home-cooked meals, felt quiet, stifled. David and Emily were at a friend's house. "Just wanted to bring you this," I said, offering the cake. "And check in. You haven't seemed yourself lately, dear." She led me to the kitchen, a space that now felt heavy with unspoken worries. "Thank you, Eleanor. That's very sweet." She picked at a loose thread on her apron. It's Michael." My heart clenched. "What about Michael, dear?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could make it, masking the storm within. She sighed, a sound laden with exhaustion. "He's just changed. He's not himself. He's always out, or in the garage. And when he is home, he's distant. He snaps at the kids. He's withdrawn from me." She looked at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know what to do. I've tried asking. He just says it's stress from school, but I know it's not. There's something more. Something he's hiding." "Has he mentioned anything about a new acquaintance?" I asked, treading carefully, my gaze fixed on her face. "A Mr. Thorne?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of fear mixed with relief. Oh, yes. He talks about him. Says he's a client. For some historical research. But it doesn't feel right, Eleanor. Michael has always been so open about his work. And this Mr. Thorne, he's just unsettling. Michael gets these late-night phone calls. Whispered conversations. And he's been talking about money. A lot of money. And how he's in a bind. A bind? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. So, the debts were real. The trap was set. Sarah nodded, twisting her hands. He said he owes Mr. Thorne a lot. More than he can pay back. And that Mr. Thorne offered him a solution. A way to make it right. But it's clearly involving more than just research, Eleanor. He's always so agitated after he meets with him. He talks about needing to fix something, or find something. The emerald pendant. The something Silas wanted. He wasn't just collecting debts, he was forcing Michael to be his unwitting accomplice, or perhaps, a desperate seeker. Sarah, I began, my voice taking on a gravitas that surprised even myself. Listen to me very carefully. This man, Mr. Thorne, he is very dangerous. And whatever Michael is involved in, it is not what he says it is. You need to be strong. For the children. For yourself. She looked at me, her eyes filled with confusion and growing fear. Dangerous? Eleanor, what are you talking about? I hesitated. How much could I tell her without unraveling my entire life? I can't explain everything right now, Sarah. But please, trust me. You need to keep your distance from this man. And keep the children away from him. Do you understand? She nodded slowly, her brow furrowed, processing my words. The sheer conviction in my voice, the urgency of my plea, seemed to bypass her rational mind and speak directly to her primal fears. Yes, Eleanor. I understand. I'll be careful. But what about Michael? I will handle Michael, I said, my gaze firm, unwavering. I will protect him. But I need you to be vigilant. If you see anything unusual, anything that frightens you, you come to me. Immediately. As I left Michael's house, the lemon pound cake still sitting untouched on their counter, a grim resolve settled over me. The quiet life of Eleanor Vance, the gentle grandmother, was indeed a thin thread on a vast, dangerous chessboard. But the queen, once hidden, was now ready to move. And she would move with all the cunning and ferocity of Alara Reed. My son was caught in Silas's web, but I would cut him free, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The game was escalating. And I had to choose my next move with absolute precision. The conversation with Sarah had been a necessary cruelty, a small cut to prevent a fatal wound. Her fear, however palpable, was a fraction of the terror that had taken root in my own heart. Knowing Michael was truly caught, that Silas had ensnared him with financial desperation, only fueled my grim determination. The extra cash was a lure, a poisoned apple, leading my son down a path he was utterly unprepared for. My mind, once dedicated to the nuances of rose pruning and the precise measurements for my famous blueberry muffins, was now a labyrinth of strategy and dark memories. The name Silas Thorne echoed through the chambers of my mind, each reverberation bringing with it the vivid, brutal clarity of his past actions. I remembered the cold, calculating glint in his eyes as he'd held a frightened young woman by the arm, twisting it until she cried out, demanding information. I remembered the chilling ease with which he'd threatened violence, the casual way he spoke of making an example of anyone who crossed him. He wasn't just a tough guy, he was a man utterly devoid of empathy, a puppet master who delighted in the suffering of his pawns. He was Julian's brute force, yes, but with a cunning that Julian, for all his charisma, often lacked. Silas was the kind of man who would burn down a village to smoke out a single rat, and then gloat about the warmth of the fire. Was I just a victim of circumstances, an unwilling accessory dragged into a nightmare? Or had I, Elara Reed, played a more active role in that distant, terrible night at Fairchild's? The question gnawed at me, a festering wound I had tried to ignore for decades. I was young, terrified, desperate to escape. I had run. I had survived. But had I simply been an innocent bystander, or was there a deeper stain on my conscience? The guilt, a constant companion, now rose to the surface, sharp and bitter. My guilt, however, did not paralyze me. It hardened my resolve. Michael was innocent. He had no part in the sins of Elara Reed. And I would not allow Silas Thorne to drag him into that abyss. I began to move with a quiet purpose, my actions methodical, almost imperceptible. My disguise as Eleanor Vance, the harmless elderly widow, was my greatest asset. Who would suspect the woman buying organic vegetables at the farmer's market, or chatting with Mrs. Gable about the weather, of being a seasoned survivor, a player in a dangerous game? I started a clandestine investigation, using the everyday rhythms of Willow Creek as my cover. I would take longer walks with my golden retriever, Daisy, straying into the less trafficked parts of town. I frequented the local diner, where gossip flowed as freely as coffee, listening intently to snippets of conversation. I made more frequent trips to the hardware store, picking up obscure items, my eyes and ears open. My observations confirmed my suspicions. Silas wasn't operating alone. I'd seen his black pickup truck more than once parked near the old, abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of town, a sprawling, derelict complex that had been empty for decades. And I'd seen the other men. 2 of them. Burly, with flat, unsmiling faces and the telltale bulge of something heavy beneath their jackets. They weren't locals. Their mannerisms were too sharp, their gazes too calculating, too watchful. They looked like Silas's enforcers, his shadows. I'd catch glimpses of them, sometimes sitting in a parked car down the street from Michael's house, sometimes lingering near the town's small park where Michael often took his children. They were observing, watching, their presence a constant, low thrum of menace. They weren't just supervising Michael, they were making sure he didn't try to bolt. They were the visible threads of the web Silas had spun around my son. The knowledge chilled me to the bone, but it also ignited something deep within. A spark of the old Elara. The Elara who had survived. The Elara who had outsmarted predators and built a new life from the ashes of the old. The instinct for self-preservation, now transformed into fierce maternal protection, surged through me. I remembered how Elara, stripped of everything, had learned to observe, to anticipate, to use her surroundings to her advantage. How she had moved through the underbelly of a city, a ghost in plain sight. These skills, long dormant, were now awakening, stretching their rusty limbs. My years as a gardener, tending to delicate plants, had taught me patience. My years as a baker had taught me precision. My years as a survivor had taught me to recognize danger, and to act. This wasn't just about protecting Michael from financial ruin. This was about protecting him from a man who embodied the darkest parts of my past, a man who would ruin lives without a second thought to achieve his ends. Silas Thorne. He was the devil I knew, and he had come for my soul, disguised as a client for my son. I made a silent vow, looking out at my thriving rose garden, at the delicate petals that belied the thorns beneath. I had run once. I had hidden once. But I would not run again. And I would not hide. Not when my son's life hung in the balance. The old scars might ache, but they also served as a reminder of what I was capable of. Eleanor Vance was about to shed her skin, and Elara Reed was ready to fight. The quiet rhythm of my days, once a comforting lullaby, now felt like a taut drumbeat, each throb a reminder of the escalating danger. The gentle Eleanor Vance, known for her prize-winning hydrangeas and comforting presence, was slowly, inexorably, giving way to Elara Reed, the survivor, the strategist. The transformation wasn't sudden, but a gradual unearthing of skills and instincts I had carefully buried beneath decades of domesticity. My morning walks with Daisy, my faithful golden retriever, were no longer merely for fresh air. They became reconnaissance missions. I noted the patterns of traffic on Michael's street, the shifts when Silas's truck was present or absent, the discrete locations where his two shadowy enforcers parked their nondescript sedan. I observed how they interacted, their terse nods, their quick, scanning glances. They were professionals, or at least well-trained thugs. Silas didn't trifle with amateurs. My garden, once my sanctuary, became a training ground for my mind. As I meticulously pruned a thorny rosebush, I mentally mapped out the layout of Michael's garage, the angles of the windows, the potential blind spots. As I mixed my dough, the rhythm of my hands became a meditation on strategy, weighing risks and rewards. The mundane tasks of my life became tools for a much darker purpose. Flashes of the old Alara, the one who navigated the dangerous underbelly of a bustling city, resurfaced with startling clarity. I remembered how she'd honed her observational skills, learning to read faces, to decipher unspoken threats, to blend into the background like a shadow. How she'd memorized escape routes, assessed vulnerabilities, planned for every contingency. These weren't learned from books, they were etched into her very being by the harsh hand of necessity. I recalled a time, long before Arthur, long before Willow Creek, when I had found myself cornered in a grimy alleyway, two hulking figures blocking my escape. Young Alara, not yet hardened by the Fairchild's fire, had frozen in terror. But then, a flicker of instinct. A loose brick in the wall. A shard of broken glass glinting in the dim light. She hadn't fought fair. She hadn't fought like a lady. She had fought to survive, leaving them disoriented and clutching their eyes, while she disappeared into the maze of the city. That cold ruthlessness, that primal cunning, now stirred within the 72-year-old Eleanor Vance. I knew Silas Thorne would never expect this. He would see an old woman, a grandmother, a fragile shell. And that, I realized, was my greatest advantage. My invisibility. My perceived weakness. It would be his undoing. I needed more information. Not just about Silas's past, but his present. Where was he staying? Who was he meeting? I expanded my covert surveillance. I'd linger a bit longer at the general store, chatting with Martha at the checkout, casually asking about new faces in town. I learned that a Mr. Thorne had rented one of the cabins at the old Whispering Pines Resort, a slightly run-down place on the other side of the lake, far enough to be discreet, but close enough to be convenient. It had a phone line, but no internet, a detail that resonated with Silas's old-school methods. He preferred direct contact, fewer digital traces. One afternoon, feigning a leisurely drive to admire the autumn foliage, I steered my sensible sedan past Whispering Pines. I spotted Silas's black pickup parked near a secluded cabin, smoke curling from its chimney. And next to it, the nondescript sedan of his enforcers. They were entrenched. They weren't leaving until their objective was met. My fear for Michael grew, sharp and cold. Silas Thorne was not a man who abandoned a pursuit. He was like a wolf, patient and relentless. And he had a pack. My son was surrounded, caught in a carefully constructed trap. But I was no longer just a frightened mother. I was Alara Reed. And she understood traps. She understood predators. She knew how to turn the hunter into the hunted. The gentle gardener was dead. The huntress, cloaked in the guise of an old woman, was awake. And she was ready. Ready to use every ounce of her cunning, every fragment of her buried past, to protect her son. The game was no longer just about survival, it was about liberation. And I, Eleanor Vance, was preparing for battle. The autumn wind, now carrying the definite bite of winter, whipped through Willow Creek, scattering the last stubborn leaves across my porch. Inside, my carefully tended hearth fire offered little warmth against the cold dread that now clung to me like a shroud. The huntress was awake, yes, but the weight of the coming confrontation pressed heavily upon me. My son's future, his very freedom, was hanging by a thread, and Silas Thorne held the scissors. I needed to know the full extent of Michael's predicament. His vague allusions to debt and solutions weren't enough. I needed to understand the mechanics of Silas's trap. My opportunity came unexpectedly one blustery afternoon. I had driven over to Michael's, ostensibly to drop off some freshly made apple butter. I saw Silas's pickup already there, parked in its usual spot. My heart hammered a familiar, unwelcome beat. Instead of approaching the front door, I slipped around to the side of the garage, where a small window, usually painted over, had been recently cleaned to let in more light. It was slightly ajar, rattling in the wind. A perfect vantage point. I pressed myself against the wall, listening, my every nerve ending alert. Their voices were low at first, muffled by the rattling window and the wind. Then, Silas's voice, sharp and cutting, rose above the general hum. "And you will have it by next week, Michael. No more excuses. My patience is wearing thin." Michael's voice, strained and hoarse, responded. "Silas, I told you, it's not that simple. The records are old. And I can't just break into a private collection without raising suspicion. I'm a teacher, for God's sake." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against my nerves. "Oh, you'll manage. You've been so resourceful with the other research I've had you do, haven't you? The blueprints for the old warehouse in Brattleboro? The access codes for the alarm system in that abandoned jewelry store in Rutland? You're a quick study, Michael. A real natural." My blood ran cold. Brattleboro. Rutland. My son, the kind, history-loving teacher, was involved in breaking and entering. He was a scout, a planner, forced into a criminal enterprise. My fears were confirmed, amplified to a horrifying degree. Those were abandoned places. Michael protested, his voice desperate. "Just recon. This is different. This is an active target. A private residence. It's too risky. And I don't even know what I'm looking for." "You're looking for what I tell you to look for," Silas snarled, his voice losing its veneer of casual threat. "And it's not a private residence, it's a vault. A secure location where certain family heirlooms are kept. And I've given you the general idea of what it looks like. A small, green bauble. Highly distinctive. And highly valuable. The one that disappeared from Fairchild's all those years ago. The emerald pendant." My blood turned to ice. He was looking for my pendant. The one I had unwittingly carried away from the inferno of my past. He knew it existed. And he believed Michael was the one to retrieve it. "Fairchild's?" Michael's voice was filled with disbelief, confusion. "What does that have to do with anything? And I still don't understand why you think it would be there. Or why I have to get it." Silas sighed, a sound of theatrical exasperation. "Because, Michael, sometimes the most unlikely people hold the most valuable secrets. And sometimes, those secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most unexpected places. Let's just say, your dear old mother, she has a very interesting history. A history that's deeply intertwined with that green bauble. And with me." A stunned silence followed. Michael. My Michael. His mother. Silas had just laid out the bare bones of my secret, hinting at a connection that would shatter Michael's world. My stomach lurched. Then, Michael's voice, incredulous, filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. "My mother? What are you talking about?" "My mother is Eleanor Vance. She bakes pies and tends her garden. She wouldn't know a green bauble from a pebble." Silas chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Oh, she knows, Michael. Believe me, she knows. She knew Alara Reed quite well. In fact, they were practically inseparable. Funny, isn't it? How some people just vanish. Only to reappear, decades later, in the most charming little towns. Don't you think?" He paused, letting his words hang in the air, a poisonous vapor. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. He knew. He knew I was Alara. And he was using that knowledge as a weapon against my son. Next week, Michael, Silas continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You bring me the pendant. Or I promise you, your quiet little life, your pretty wife, your sweet children, they'll all pay the price. And that little secret about your mother, well, I'm sure the local press would find that quite the story. Something to ruin her impeccable reputation. Something to ensure your children grow up knowing exactly what kind of blood runs in their veins. You understand me? A choked sound came from Michael, a sound of utter despair. You can't. Oh, I most certainly can, Silas retorted, his voice chillingly calm. And I will. Unless you deliver. I pulled away from the window, stumbling back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream of pure terror and rage. He had found me. He knew. And he was using Michael to get to me, to force me to reveal the pendant's hiding place. He wasn't just threatening Michael, he was threatening to expose Alara Reed, to shatter the very foundation of my son's life with the truth of my past. The image of my son, caught in Silas's ruthless grip, spurred a cold fury in me. He believed I was weak, an old woman he could manipulate. He believed my secrets were merely a tool for his gain. But he didn't know the full story of Alara Reed. He didn't know the depth of my resolve. My son's world was crashing down, and I was the only one who could stop it. I had to tell Michael. The truth, however painful, was now his only shield. And the emerald pendant, buried deep beneath my rose garden, was no longer a forgotten secret. It was the key to his salvation, or his utter destruction. The final act had begun. The biting wind outside now felt like a physical manifestation of the tempest raging within me. Silas's words, sharp and venomous, echoed in my mind. Your dear old mother, she has a very interesting history. She knew Alara Reed quite well. He hadn't just discovered my secret, he was weaponizing it, twisting it into a blackmail tool to destroy Michael and claim his prize. There was no more time for pretense, no more room for hesitation. The ticking clock of Silas's ultimatum, next week, pressed down on me with suffocating weight. My immediate instinct was to protect Michael from the raw, ugly truth of my past, to shield him from the monstrous legacy of Alara Reed. But Silas had already unveiled it, or at least hinted at it, sowing seeds of doubt and fear in my son's mind. To deny it now would be to brand myself a liar, to alienate him completely when he needed me most. I had to face the music. All of it. I waited until nightfall, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows on Michael's driveway. His car was back, but the garage light was still on, a solitary beacon in the encroaching darkness. He was still there, stewing in the poisonous revelation Silas had just dropped. This was it. The moment of truth. I walked across the damp lawn, my steps unusually heavy. The scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filled the air, a melancholic backdrop to the grim task ahead. I pushed open the garage door, the squeal of the hinges a jarring sound in the quiet night. Michael stood by the Mustang, his back to me, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The wrench lay forgotten on the workbench. He didn't turn around, as if sensing the weight of the moment, the inevitable confrontation. Michael, I said, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. He flinched, then slowly, reluctantly, turned to face me. His eyes were red-rimmed, haunted, filled with a raw confusion that tore at my heart. He didn't speak, just stared at me, searching my face for answers, for truth, for anything to make sense of the chaos Silas had unleashed. You heard him, I stated, not a question, but a painful affirmation. He nodded, a single, jerky movement. He said you knew Alara Reed. He said that you have a past. With him. That you're connected to, a green bauble from Fairchild's Diamond Exchange. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, a desperate shield against the pain. Mom, what did he mean? My throat tightened. The carefully constructed life of Eleanor Vance, the gentle grandmother, shattered into a million pieces at my feet. The truth, ugly and raw, had to come out. For Michael. I walked slowly towards him, my gaze never leaving his face. Sit down, Michael, I said, gesturing to the old stool Silas had occupied just hours before. He obeyed, his movements robotic. I remained standing, needing the physical posture of strength, of resolve. My name, I began, my voice trembling at first, then steadying with each painful word. My name was once Alara Reed. I was born in New York City. Not here. Not in Willow Creek. His eyes widened further, a flicker of betrayal joining the fear. You lied to me? All these years? I didn't lie, Michael, I corrected, my voice firm despite the ache in my chest. I ran. I changed my name, my identity. I built a new life, a good life, here, with your father. With you. Because the life I had before, it was a nightmare. A nightmare I had to escape to survive. I took a deep breath, the garage air suddenly suffocating. Silas Thorne, he was part of that nightmare. A long time ago. He was involved in a robbery. A diamond heist. At Fairchild's Diamond Exchange. It went horribly wrong. People died. There was a fire. I was there. I was part of it. Not willingly, not as a willing participant, but I was there. And I ran. I saw the shock register on his face, the horror, the utter disbelief. His mother. His sweet, unassuming mother. A criminal. My heart shattered for the boy who was losing his mother, not to death, but to a terrifying truth. I know this is impossible for you to comprehend, I continued, my voice raw with emotion. I know this shatters everything you thought you knew about me. But I need you to understand, Michael. I wasn't the mastermind. I was young, desperate, foolish. I fell in with the wrong crowd. And Julian Vance, Silas's boss, he was charismatic, manipulative. He exploited my desperation. I tried to get out, but once you're in with people like that, it's not easy. And that night, I escaped. I took nothing with me, except one small thing, by accident. In the chaos. A small, green pendant. His eyes were wide, fixed on my face, trying to reconcile the woman before him, his mother, with the terrifying past I was unfolding. The green bauble? I nodded. Yes. I buried it. Deep. I didn't know its value then. I just knew it was a piece of that hell, and I wanted it gone. To never remind me of what I had seen, what I had done. I thought it was gone forever. That I was gone forever. That Alara Reed was dead. I took a step closer, my hand reaching out, resting gently on his arm. His muscles were tense, rigid. Silas, he knew I was there. He suspected I had something. He's been searching for that pendant for decades. And now, he's found me. And he's found you. He's using you, Michael. Using your debts, your good nature, to force you to find that pendant for him. To pressure me into giving it to him. He finally looked away, his gaze falling to his hands, clenched into fists. He said he'd expose you. Expose our family. Ruin everything. He will, I confirmed, my voice unwavering. Unless we stop him. And we will. Together. He looked up at me again, his eyes filled with a new emotion, raw anger, mixed with profound pain. Mom, how could you? How could you hide this for so long? For my whole life? The question hung heavy in the air, a painful silence. Because I loved you, Michael, I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. I loved you and your father more than life itself. I wanted to protect you from that darkness. To give you a clean, beautiful life, free from the shadow of Alara Reed. I thought I had succeeded. I thought I had buried her forever. He didn't answer. His face was a mask of conflicting emotions, betrayal, shock, hurt, and perhaps a nascent understanding. He was furious, yes, but also scared. And he saw the desperation in my eyes, the raw, agonizing truth of my confession. "I know you're angry, Michael," I said, my voice firming, regaining its strength. "And you have every right to be. But right now, we don't have time for anger. We have a monster to face. And that monster is Silas Thorne. He has given you an ultimatum. He wants that pendant. And he will destroy everything if he doesn't get it. So, we give it to him. But we do it on our terms." His gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something new in his eyes, not just fear, but resolve. A faint echo of the steel I knew lay beneath his gentle exterior. He was still reeling, still processing, but he was also listening. He was no longer just a victim. He was a son, and he was ready to stand with his mother, even if that mother was a ghost from a terrifying past. The path ahead was treacherous, fraught with danger, but we would face it together. The old scars were now exposed, raw and painful, but they were also the foundation of a new, fierce strength. The final act was upon us. The air in the garage hung thick with the ghosts of my past and the stark reality of our present. Michael sat on the stool, head in his hands, absorbing the brutal truth I had just laid bare. The initial shock and anger slowly morphed into a quiet, simmering resolve as he processed the enormity of Silas's threat and my confession. He was still reeling, but the fear for his family, the raw injustice of Silas's coercion, began to outweigh the pain of my deception. "So," Michael finally said, his voice hoarse, pushing himself off the stool. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a smudge of grease on his temple. "So, you're saying, this pendant? The green bauble. Silas thinks it's worth destroying my life for. And you actually have it?" I nodded, my gaze steady. "I do. Buried it deep under the old willow tree at the back of my garden. Where your father and I always planned to put our memorial bench." The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. A symbol of peace, guarding a relic of chaos. I never looked at it again after that night. Just buried it and tried to bury Alara Reed along with it. He walked over to the Mustang, running a hand over its dusty hood. "And Silas, he wants me to break into some secure vault to get it, thinking I'm finding his lost treasure, when all along it's been, here. In Willow Creek. With you." A mirthless chuckle escaped him. "The man's a fool." "No, Michael," I corrected softly. "He's not a fool. He's cunning. He suspected I had it. He knows my old patterns. He probably thought I'd be too smart to keep it near me, or too sentimental to bury it in a place of personal significance. He's testing you. He's using you to lead him to me, or to make me expose myself." Michael turned, his eyes, still wounded, now held a new, steely glint. "Then we don't let him win. We don't let him destroy us." He looked at me, truly saw me, not just Eleanor Vance, but Alara Reed, the survivor. "So, what do we do, Mom? How do we give him the pendant on our terms?" A glimmer of grim satisfaction flickered within me. My son, though scarred, was ready to fight. "We don't just hand it over, Michael. That would only prolong his menace. He'd simply find another way to extort us. We use the pendant as bait. We set a trap of our own. We stayed up late, the dim light of the garage casting long, dancing shadows, as we meticulously began to craft our plan. My mind, now fully awakened, whirred with possibilities. The years of quiet observation of Willow Creek, the town's rhythms, its hidden nooks and forgotten places, all became potential assets. "He likes the old mill, doesn't he?" I mused aloud, recalling Silas's truck parked near the derelict structure. "It's isolated. Overgrown. Perfect for his kind of business." Michael nodded, a map of Willow Creek laid out on the workbench, his finger tracing lines. "Old Blackwood Mill. It's been abandoned for 50 years. No one goes near it. Used to be a popular spot for teenagers, but the county closed it off after that cave-in a decade ago. It's unstable. Unstable, I repeated, a slow smile spreading across my face. Perfect. We used that to our advantage. Our plan began to take shape, a delicate dance of deception and calculated risks. It wasn't about brute force, it was about outsmarting Silas, playing on his arrogance and his single-minded obsession with the pendant. Michael, despite his initial shock, brought his own sharp intellect to the table, his teacher's analytical mind dissecting possibilities, anticipating Silas's moves. We need to make him believe he's won, I explained, outlining the core of my strategy. We make him think he has the upper hand, that he's found his treasure and destroyed Alara Reed. And then, we turn the tables. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate touch of rose petals, now moved with the precision of a surgeon, sketching diagrams on scrap paper, outlining timelines. Michael, still pale but resolute, listened intently, offering his insights, his unique perspective on local laws and police procedures. He even researched the specific model of Silas's truck, noting its vulnerabilities. We decided to use a decoy. Not the real pendant, not yet. A carefully crafted fake, designed to look convincing enough in the dim light of the old mill, to feed Silas's greed. The real pendant would be our leverage, our ultimate weapon. And the police? Michael asked, his brow furrowed. We can't just let him get away. And what about your past, Mom? The police will be involved, I confirmed. But they won't be our primary weapon. Not at first. We need to catch Silas in the act, red-handed, and expose his threats against you. And my past, I looked at Michael, my gaze softening. My past is now a part of our present. And if exposing it means saving you, then it's a price I'm willing to pay. I'm no longer hiding, Michael. Not for him. He reached across the workbench and squeezed my hand, a silent gesture of acceptance, of forgiveness, of fierce love. It was a moment of profound connection, forged in the crucible of shared danger. My son had lost his idealized image of his mother, but he had found something far stronger, her unwavering resolve, her warrior spirit. The night deepened, but the garage was no longer a place of despair. It was a war room, illuminated by the fierce light of our shared purpose. Eleanor Vance, the quiet grandmother, and Michael Vance, the history teacher, had formed an unlikely alliance. And Alara Reed, the huntress, was ready to lure her prey into the perfect trap. The game was set. And the old woman was about to make her most dangerous, most audacious move. The next few days were a blur of meticulous preparation, a tense choreography of stealth and deception. The plan, which had seemed audacious in the dim light of the garage, now felt terrifyingly real as the deadline approached. Every detail mattered. Every step had to be precise. The fate of my son, and indeed, the uneasy peace I had cultivated for decades, hinged on it. Our primary objective was to lure Silas to the old Blackwood Mill, a place steeped in history and decay, a perfect stage for the grim drama we were about to enact. Its isolation, its treacherous terrain, and its crumbling structure would all be our allies. First, the bait. Michael, still wearing his mask of increasing desperation, delivered a carefully worded, anonymous message to Silas through an intermediary known to his enforcers, a burner phone, acquired under strict instructions from me. The message hinted at a breakthrough, a discovery of a stash connected to the Fairchild's heist, hidden in a place of sentimental value to the old woman. A place Silas would never suspect. A place Michael, under duress, had managed to track down. The rendezvous was set for dusk, 2 days hence, at the old Blackwood Mill. The message specified no one else. Just Silas. And Michael. The pendant, Michael would claim, was too delicate, too valuable to be handled by anyone else. This was a direct challenge to Silas's ego, an appeal to his greed, designed to ensure he came alone, or at least, left his usual muscle at a distance. While Michael skillfully handled the communication, I was busy with my own preparations. I visited the real pendant. Under the cover of twilight, I dug up the small, heavy object from beneath the willow tree in my garden. The emerald, larger and more intensely green than I remembered, gleamed dully in the beam of my flashlight, a silent testament to a lifetime of secrets. It was beautiful, valuable, and utterly poisonous. I carefully wrapped it in a velvet cloth, then secured it in a small, weighted leather pouch. This was not the bait. This was the ultimate leverage. The actual bait was a meticulously crafted fake. Using my old jewelry-making tools, long packed away, I fashioned a convincing replica. A large piece of green glass, carefully cut and polished, set into a cheap metal frame. In the dim light of the old mill, to a man blinded by greed, it would pass. I dabbed a tiny drop of old rose oil on it, hoping to give it a faint, familiar scent, a subtle psychological trigger from my garden. Then, the terrain. I spent hours at the old mill, sometimes alone, sometimes with Michael, under the guise of reminiscing about Willow Creek's industrial past. We mapped out its treacherous interior, the unstable floorboards, the crumbling walls, the dark, hidden stairwells, the old, rusted machinery that lay dormant like sleeping dragons. I pointed out the best places to hide, the narrow passages, the unstable spots in the flooring, the areas where a sudden push or a strategically placed tripwire could be devastating. Michael, initially hesitant, transformed. The history teacher, once only interested in the past, now saw the mill as a dynamic, living battlefield. He helped me set up small, almost invisible tripwires connected to old, rusty buckets filled with rocks, designed to create noise and confusion, to disorient and separate Silas from any potential backup. He rigged a door to jam, and showed me a way to secure the main entrance from the inside, once Silas was in. "Mom," he said, his voice hushed in the cavernous mill, "this place is a death trap." "Are you sure about this?" "It's a death trap for those who don't know its secrets, Michael," I replied, my gaze sweeping the decaying structure. "And we know its secrets. Every creaking beam, every unstable plank. We'll use them all." My internal monologue was a whirlwind of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of purpose. This was it. The culmination of decades of running, hiding, building a new life. Elara Reed, the frightened girl, had become Eleanor Vance, the serene gardener. Now, Eleanor Vance was about to become Elara, the strategist, the protector. The woman who would fight for her son's freedom, even if it meant sacrificing her own. The eve of the rendezvous was cold and clear, the moon a sliver in the sky. My old house felt strangely empty, filled with the echoes of a past about to collide violently with the present. I brewed a strong cup of tea, my hands steady as I poured, but my heart a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I thought of Arthur, my beloved husband, whose quiet strength had been my anchor. He would have been horrified by this, by the resurgence of Elara. But he would have understood the desperate, fierce love of a mother. I thought of Michael, my son, who now carried the heavy burden of my past, yet stood beside me, unwavering. He was no longer just my innocent boy, he was my partner, my comrade in this desperate gambit. I laid out the fake pendant, gleaming dully on my kitchen table, next to the real one, safely tucked away in its weighted pouch. Two objects. One a lie, one the truth. Both equally powerful in the hands of a woman determined to save her son. The air thrummed with anticipation, with the electric charge of impending conflict. Fear was a cold, constant companion, but beneath it, a strange sense of liberation bloomed. I was no longer hiding. I was no longer running. I was fighting. And the old woman, in her quiet, unassuming way, was about to teach Silas Thorne a very painful lesson about underestimating her. The old mill awaited its grim guests. And its secrets were about to be put to deadly use. The twilight hours descended upon Willow Creek with a hushed gravity, painting the sky in bruised purples and smudged grays. The air at the old Blackwood mill was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and an undercurrent of something metallic, perhaps just rust, or perhaps the sharpening edge of dread. My heart, a relentless drum against my ribs, hammered a rhythm that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Tonight, Eleanor Vance would face her ghost. I stood in the vast, echoing main chamber of the mill, the faint light filtering through the grime-caked windows doing little to dispel the gloom. My sensible walking shoes were swapped for sturdy boots, my comfortable cardigan replaced by a thick, practical jacket. A small flashlight, a relic from Arthur's toolkit, was tucked into my pocket. My hands, surprisingly steady, held a small, weighted leather pouch, the genuine emerald pendant, my ultimate leverage. The fake lay waiting on a dilapidated wooden table we had strategically placed in the center of the room. Michael was not with me. He was in position, hidden amongst the dense brush outside, with a burner phone, ready to make the anonymous call to Detective Miller, our last resort. He was our backup, our connection to the world outside this crumbling monument to forgotten industry. I had insisted he stay out of direct sight, for his safety and for the credibility of his anonymous tip. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of an imaginary clock amplifying the silence, the wind's mournful sigh through broken panes. I scanned the perimeter, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Every creak of the old building, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt through me. Then, the low rumble of a familiar engine. Silas's black pickup. It pulled up silently, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness, illuminating the decaying facade of the mill like a grotesque stage set. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was deafening. A figure emerged from the truck. Silas Thorne, cloaked in a long, dark coat, a confident, predatory swagger in his step. He wasn't alone. One of his burly enforcers, a man with a heavy jaw and cold eyes, was with him. My stomach clenched. He had broken his word. Of course he had. Silas never played fair. They pushed open the heavy main door, the hinges groaning in protest. Silas stepped into the mill, his gaze sweeping the cavernous space, his eyes narrowing as they landed on me. The light was dim, but I could still see the flicker of triumph in his expression. The enforcer remained by the door, blocking our exit, his posture radiating menace. "Eleanor Vance," Silas drawled, his voice echoing in the vast space. It wasn't the voice he used with Michael. This was the voice of a man who believed he held all the cards, a voice laced with contempt and cruel amusement. Or should I say, Alara Reed. Quite the transformation. "I almost didn't recognize you, dear. Though that stubborn look in your eyes, that never really changes, does it?" My heart pounded, but my voice was steady, calm. "Silas. It's been a long time. I thought you were dead." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Wishful thinking, Alara. You're not the only one who knows how to disappear. And resurface. But unlike you, I came back for what's mine. And it seems, I've found it." His gaze shifted to the dilapidated table in the center of the room, to the fake pendant gleaming dully in the weak light. "You led my son into your dirty games," I said, my voice rising, an edge of steel entering it. "You threatened his family." "That was a mistake, Silas." He scoffed. "Your son is a fool. Easy to manipulate. And you think you can play games with me? An old woman, hiding in a small town, baking cookies? Pathetic." He walked towards the table, his eyes fixed on the pendant, his greed overriding his caution. "Where is he, by the way? Your boy? Hiding under your apron strings?" "He's not here," I lied smoothly. "This is between you and me. Always has been." As he neared the table, his hand reaching for the fake pendant, I spoke, my voice clear and sharp, cutting through the silence. "Don't touch it, Silas." He paused, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. "Oh? And why not?" "It's what I came for. The Fairchild's emerald. The one you so conveniently misplaced decades ago." "It's not yours," I retorted, my voice firm. "And it's not the only thing from that night. There's something else. Something you overlooked." He narrowed his eyes, a ripple of unease finally touching his arrogant composure. "What are you talking about?" "Julian Vance," I began, letting the name hang heavy in the air, knowing its power. He kept meticulous records. Not just of the targets, but of his associates. their weaknesses, their betrayals. And he kept a detailed account of how the Fairchild's heist went sideways. And who was responsible for the collateral damage. A particular incident involving a security guard and a certain ruthless enforcer. Silas froze, his hand inches from the fake pendant. His face, usually so composed in its menace, contorted with a flash of raw fury. You're lying. Julian's dead. Those records burned in the fire. Did they? I challenged, my gaze unwavering. Or did he have a contingency? A hidden stash of information? Information that proves your true role in that night, Silas. Information that could send you away for life. Information that I managed to preserve. Just in case. His face paled, his eyes darting to his enforcer, then back to me. The greed for the pendant was now warring with a deeper, more primal fear. He knew Julian. He knew Julian was capable of such a thing. And he knew I was not above using it. You play a dangerous game, Alara, he hissed, his voice low and menacing. Where is it? The information? It's safe, I replied, a small, triumphant smile touching my lips. And it's connected to the real pendant. The real one, Silas, not that cheap piece of glass. I pulled out the weighted pouch from my pocket, letting the genuine emerald glint in the dim light for a split second before concealing it again. You want the pendant? You want that information? Then you'll listen to my terms. His face was a mask of furious calculation. He was trapped. The enforcer shifted, his hand going to his hip. And if you try anything, you'll never see either of them again, I warned, my gaze fixed on Silas. And I'll make sure that information finds its way to the police, with or without my living presence. You know I'm capable of that, Silas. You know Alara Reed. She always had a plan B. Culmination, a sudden, guttural roar of frustration erupted from Silas. He lunged forward, not at the pendant, but at me, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. He intended to silence me, to extract the truth with force. My own instincts, honed by decades of survival, flared. I didn't flinch. I ducked, surprisingly agile for my age, and with a swift, brutal kick, I targeted his knee. He cried out, losing his balance, stumbling backward into the rickety wooden table. The noise of his fall, the shattering of the fake pendant, was the signal. From the rafters above, a cascade of old, rusty buckets, triggered by Michael's tripwires, rained down with a deafening clatter. Dust exploded into the air, creating a blinding, chaotic haze. The enforcer, startled, looked up, distracted. This was my chance. As Silas scrambled, clutching his injured knee, I seized the opportunity. My hand shot out, not to strike, but to grab the heavy, metal crank of an old, rusted machine. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled, releasing a powerful lever. The ancient gears groaned, turning with agonizing slowness, and a massive, rusty iron door, concealed behind a pile of debris, began to slide open, revealing a hidden, vertical shaft leading to the lower levels of the mill. This way, Silas, I yelled, my voice ringing with grim triumph. This is where we settle our debts. He looked up, his eyes now filled with pure, unadulterated terror, realizing he had stepped into my trap, my domain. The old woman, the baker of cookies, had become the architect of his downfall. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the prey. And the mill, our silent witness, was about to claim its due. The air in the old Blackwood mill hung heavy with dust, the acrid smell of rust, and the lingering tension of battle. Silas Thorne, his face contorted in a mask of pain and fury, lay sprawled near the now opened shaft, clutching his injured knee. His enforcer, disoriented by the chaos and the sudden avalanche of buckets and debris, hesitated, his eyes darting between Silas and me. Stay back, I commanded, my voice resonating with an authority that surprised even myself. I held the weighted pouch with the real pendant high, a silent promise of what I would do if they pressed further. He's yours, Silas. The pendant, and the other information. It all goes to the police if you move. Just then, the wail of sirens, faint at first, then growing louder, pierced the night. Michael's call. Perfect timing. The enforcer's eyes widened, a flicker of panic replacing his usual coldness. He looked at Silas, then at the mill entrance, clearly weighing his options. Loyalty to Silas or self-preservation? Self-preservation won. With a guttural curse, he bolted, disappearing into the twilight. Silas snarled, trying to push himself up, but his knee buckled. "You conniving bitch," he hissed, spitting the words. "You think you've won?" "I think I've just ensured you won't threaten my family ever again," I retorted, my gaze unwavering. "And that, Silas, is a victory." The mill doors creaked open fully, and two uniformed officers, flashlights cutting through the gloom, entered cautiously, weapons drawn. Behind them, a figure emerged, tall and composed, Detective Miller, his face grim, his eyes scanning the scene. He had been quietly investigating Silas's suspicious activities in town, an anonymous tip having brought him to the mill. Our tip simply accelerated his timeline. He saw me, an elderly woman standing amidst the wreckage, holding a small pouch. He saw Silas, slumped on the floor, injured and furious. He saw the empty truck outside. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, a question in his eyes, before he focused on Silas. "Silas Thorne," Detective Miller said, his voice calm but authoritative. "You're under arrest. For extortion, attempted assault, and breaking and entering. And we have reason to believe this ties into several other ongoing investigations." As the officers moved to secure Silas, handcuffing him with practiced ease, he spat one last venomous threat at me. "You haven't heard the last of this, Alara." "Not by a long shot." I met his gaze, a quiet defiance in my eyes. "Oh, I think I have, Silas. I think I finally have." Detective Miller approached me, his gaze analytical. "Mrs. Vance. We received an anonymous tip about a disturbance, and then a more specific one about a man named Silas Thorne, and threats made against your son, Michael Vance. What exactly happened here?" This was it. The moment I had dreaded for decades. My past, now undeniable, stood ready to be laid bare before the law, before the world. I took a deep breath, the dust in the air scratching at my throat, and handed him the weighted pouch. "This," I began, my voice clear and steady, "is an emerald pendant. It was stolen during the Fairchild's Diamond Exchange robbery in New York, almost 50 years ago. And it's been buried in my garden ever since." Detective Miller's eyebrows shot up. His expression shifted from professional inquiry to profound shock. He looked at the pendant, then back at me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "My name," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, "is Eleanor Vance. But it was once Alara Reed. And I was there, at Fairchild's. Not by choice, not as a willing criminal, but I was there. And Silas Thorne was one of the perpetrators. He found me, detective. He threatened my son, Michael, to get this pendant back. He wanted to use him, to destroy him. So I set a trap." I recounted the events, concisely, truthfully. The initial shock Michael had relayed to me, Silas's growing intimidation, the coerced research, the ultimatum. I even hinted at the other information I claimed to possess, knowing that even if Julian Vance's records were truly gone, the threat of them would keep Silas quiet. Michael, who had emerged from the bushes moments after the sirens arrived, stood silently by my side, his face pale but resolute, a testament to the truth of my words. The detective listened intently, his pen scratching notes, his expression a mixture of disbelief, admiration, and the grim recognition of a complicated case unraveling before him. The local news was, predictably, a sensation. Willow Creek Grandma unmasks decades-old diamond heist suspect. Sweet Baker reveals secret past as heist accomplice. The headlines screamed, sensationalizing, simplifying, judging. Some people in Willow Creek were horrified, their polite smiles replaced by scandalized whispers. Others, those who truly knew me, saw the truth in my eyes, the desperation that had driven my past, the fierce love that fueled my present. My carefully crafted reputation as the gentle, unassuming Eleanor Vance was shattered. But in its place, something stronger emerged. Truth. The hardest part, in the immediate aftermath, was facing Michael. He was still angry, still grappling with the monumental lie of his mother's life. But beneath the anger, there was a growing understanding, a profound respect for the woman who had risked everything to protect him. "Mom," he said, the day after Silas's arrest, his voice quiet, as we sat in my living room, the scent of wood smoke comforting us. I don't understand everything. And I'm still angry that you hid it from me. But, thank you. For telling me. For saving us." I reached for his hand, my fingers intertwining with his. "You're my son, Michael. My everything. There was nothing I wouldn't do." A single tear traced a path down my weathered cheek, a tear of exhaustion, of relief, and of a love that transcended time and secrets. "I'm sorry, my love. For the lie. For the pain it caused." He squeezed my hand. "We'll get through this. Together. We always do." He looked at me, a flicker of his old warmth returning to his eyes. "You're not just Eleanor Vance, Mom. Or Alara Reed. You're just Mom. And you're incredible." The resolution wasn't a neat, happy ending. My past would forever be a part of my present. There would be investigations, interrogations, public scrutiny. But the suffocating weight of the secret, the silent, omnipresent fear, had lifted. Silas Thorne was gone, his power broken. Michael was safe. And in the crucible of this terrifying confrontation, our relationship had been reforged, stronger, deeper, more honest than ever before. The dust had settled, and in its wake, a new kind of freedom began to emerge. The crisp morning air carried the scent of pine and impending snow, a gentle promise of winter's embrace. My hands, once trembling with fear, now moved with a deliberate, quiet confidence as I pruned the last of my rose bushes, preparing them for their long slumber. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, police interviews, and the unrelenting scrutiny of both the local community and the national news. My serene life in Willow Creek had been irrevocably altered. Some of my neighbors, caught in the grip of scandal, now offered only wary glances or hurried averted gazes. The women of my garden club, once eager for my advice on soil amendments, now kept a polite, uncomfortable distance. The whispers followed me through the grocery store aisles, speculating on the true extent of Alara Reed's involvement in the Fairchild's heist, weighing her sins against her current image. It wasn't easy. The loss of my carefully cultivated anonymity, the judgment in some eyes, stung. But then there were others. Mrs. Gable, from across the street, who brought me a freshly baked casserole with a firm, knowing look, saying, "Eleanor, you did what you had to do. Any mother would." The young barista at the coffee shop, a budding history enthusiast, who approached me with a shy reverence, whispering, "Mrs. Vance," that was incredibly brave. And, most importantly, Michael, Sarah, and my grandchildren. Our family, though bruised, had not broken. If anything, the truth had forged new, unbreakable bonds. Michael, no longer carrying the crushing weight of Silas's threats and his own desperate secrets, was slowly regaining his old spark. The haunted look in his eyes had receded, replaced by a quiet strength. He was still processing the profound shock of his mother's past, but his love and respect for me had deepened, stripped of any illusions. He now saw the full, complex woman I was, not just the idealized mother. Sarah, initially furious and deeply hurt, had found her own strength. We had talked, long and painfully, over countless cups of tea. I had laid bare the fear, the desperation, the desperate measures I had taken to protect them all. She saw the truth in my eyes, the raw vulnerability beneath the steely resolve. She saw the profound love I held for her husband, for her children. Her anger had slowly given way to understanding, and eventually, a fierce loyalty. She now understood the dark forces we had battled, and her fear had transformed into a protective instinct for her own family. My grandchildren, Emily and David, were too young to fully grasp the nuances of organized crime and decades-old heists. To them, Grandma Eleanor was still the best baker, the most patient storyteller, the one who always knew where to find the plumpest berries. Their innocence, carefully guarded, remained a beacon of light in the aftermath of the storm. They knew Grandma had been through something difficult, but their pure, unconditional love was a balm to my weary soul. The emerald pendant, the catalyst for all this chaos, was now in the hands of the authorities, a crucial piece of evidence in Silas Thorne's renewed prosecution. Justice, though slow, was finally catching up to him. I would likely be called to testify, to face the glare of a courtroom, to relive the nightmare of Fairchilds yet again. It wouldn't be easy. But I was ready. As I finished pruning the roses, my gaze drifted to the old willow tree at the back of my garden, the spot where the pendant had lain buried for half a century. The ground still looked disturbed, a faint scar on the earth. It was a reminder, not just of a buried secret, but of a buried self. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, the woman who had painstakingly cultivated a perfect life, a perfect lie. And I was no longer merely Alara Reed, the frightened girl who ran. I was a mosaic of both. A woman who had made mistakes, who had carried a heavy burden, but who had ultimately faced her past, not to bury it, but to conquer it. My life would never be entirely quiet again. The echoes of my past would always linger, a faint hum beneath the surface of my days. But they were no longer suffocating me. They were a part of me, woven into the rich tapestry of my experience. I looked at my garden, at the skeletal rose bushes reaching towards the pale autumn sky, promising new blooms in the spring. Just like me. Scarred, weathered, but still resilient. Still capable of life, of beauty, of growth. I had lost my anonymity, but I had gained my freedom. I had risked everything, and in doing so, I had not only saved my son, but I had finally, truly, saved myself. The sun, breaking through a cloud, cast a golden light over my garden, signaling a new dawn. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was real. It was honest. And for Eleanor Vance, for Alara Reed, that was more than enough. My story was not over, it had simply found its true beginning.